Good afternoon, everybody. I have to say we are absolutely delighted to see you all. It's got to that stage at the end of day 2 where we were going, are people going to turn up? Will they have left already? So we are very, very happy to see you this afternoon. Welcome to the session on getting beyond the hype of gamification. I'm absolutely delighted this afternoon to be introducing you to 3 fantastic speakers who will be telling you 2 case studies around less about how to do gamification, but more about how they did gamification. It feels like a topic that's been kicking around for quite a long time, and we keep coming back to it in the learning space. And it can carry things like, is it gimmicky? Is it all about badge hunting? Is it necessary? So we'll explore some of that stuff in the session today. The speakers will speak, and then at the end, there's going to be some time for questions. We're going to try and give you a fair bit of time for questions at the end, if that's possible. So just write your questions down as you're going, and then we won't get this super awkward tumbleweed at the end with any luck, okay? Also, if anyone at the back's feeling lonely, do feel free to come forward. No sneaking off if that's okay. All right. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to our 3 speakers. First here is Stuart Pedley-Smith, who is an accountant, she says, pausing, who has a passion for learning and developing professionals. Stuart works as head of learning at Kaplan and trains, we discovered this morning, over 45,000 accountants a year in the UK alone. And I was like, wow, I had no idea there were that many people training to be accountants in the UK. So you're going to talk to us about your gamification experience and how you're using that within a professional context. And then we have Caroline Black and Scott Anderson here, all the way from Edinburgh, from RBS in Edinburgh. And they are the design team, and they're working with content for the whole of the bank. So they've got some really, really good insights into how they're using gamification in the bank to generate engagement and behaviour. Is that about right? Excellent stuff. Okay, enough from me for now. You will hear from me at the end when you have all your amazing questions. And I'm going to hand over to Stuart. Thank you.
Thank you. Am I? Yeah, as I speak? Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. And just to reiterate Julie's comments, thank you for staying. So there's an element of my presentation that I think is a curiosity piece. So I'm going to explain a little bit about Kaplan, because I think it's the context in which we're doing the gamification and the industry in which we operate that I think could be of interest to you. So I'm going to run through a little bit about that, then I'm going to talk about what we did, and then I've got, I just sat in the session on curiosity, so I'm going to say something about curiosity at the end, the curiosity factor, something that might be of interest that's a bit of a byproduct from what we did. And it's always interesting at the end of a 2 days is what this is, because you reflect back on some of the other sessions. And on the way down on the train, I caught a late train, so I caught the school run. And there was all these, sort of 12, 13-year-olds jumping on the train. And they all jumped on the train, and they were all chatting, and they were all engaged. But the first thing that they did when they sat down, and I can see them now, and there was 4 of them, and they sat down, and the first thing they did was they were talking. They were talking to each other, but they were on their mobile phones. There was engagement going on, and it sort of became this sort of idea that what we're trying to do with gamification, to a certain extent, is steal the time when people are on trains in order to do something slightly perhaps more constructive. And that's not to say you shouldn't play games and you shouldn't do other things, or you shouldn't actually communicate, because that's an important thing. But in our world, in the world in which I have, time is very precious. So we're dealing with people in many instances postgraduate, they're employed full-time, and we're having to sort of say, look, what we're covering in the time that we have available, you need to do a lot more learning outside. So everything we're trying to do is engage them outside of the classroom or outside of whichever learning environment that we're looking at. And the second thing that struck me from the 30 people under 30 today was that one of the guys' ambitions was to get beyond the points, badges and leaderboards of gamification. Well, I have got a slide on points, badges and leaderboards on gamification, so I'll share that with you. Okay, so those are the three things. The interesting byproduct. We're telling it as a story. I think we're all telling the story here. We're not sort of saying this is how to do it. What we're saying is these are the stumbles that we've made along the way, and the principles. It's the principles that I think is of most interest. As Connie says, we train about 45,000 accountants, and she was genuinely, as Julie says, was genuinely taken aback by the scale that really do we need that many.
I think the word was disturbed.
Disturbed was the, yeah, do we really need that many accountants here? Kaplan itself is trained about 1 million people a year worldwide. So we're a professional division of a large education and training company. So this bit here that sort of says, look, I just want to talk about Kaplan for a moment, is because it's relevant to our journey. So that's our strapline. We're an education and assessment organisation. We like to use the word finance professional because it's such a varied area these days, but to you it may translate much easier as accountants. They're studying, the age group is 16, 19, 21, 24, so it's a sort of a mixed bag of age groups, the two sort of strands of the qualification, some coming out as school leavers. Obviously, we're all into the apprenticeship space now, but others coming out as graduates. Our clients, PwC, Deloitte, the big accountancy firms, and what they do is they send their students to us. It's a 3-year program, effectively, at 3 levels. It's not changed very much over the years. And at the end of it, you become a qualified accountant. And you get, and you'll see the significance of this, obviously, you get a badge, a certification, and that badge then takes you through your professional career. It's a bit like a doctor or a solicitor and a lawyer, and you go say, who are you? And you say, I'm a qualified accountant, and I have a certificate, and I have a badge to prove it. And that badge, my badge is very old now. My badge, it's a bit like a driving license. The badge that you had doesn't get re-examined every year. It actually still sits there, and people use that badge as a form of social status. So as it says here, part of Kaplaning, the little bit at the bottom is just to tell you about how we deliver content, because once again, this is the complexity of gamification for us. So we have 4 delivery channels. We tend not to think about online and offline, or classroom and online. So we tend to think about a structured program, a formal structure versus an informal. So of our delivery channels, classroom is structured. There are days that you have to pitch up. You turn up, you engage in the learning in the day. So that's structured. But we also do a live online, which is a webcast, a sort of type product, whereby we're presenting on a distance learning concept, but actually it's structured. You still pitch up. You can watch the recording, but that's not the point. The point really that we want them to do is to pitch up. So we've got the structured side, and then we've got an on-demand and instructional product, and then what we would refer to as a traditional distance learning. So these are flexible. You can start them any time, and the student or learner can engage with them at any time. And so once again, when we start to look at the numbers behind this, it's kind of important to just bear in mind that when we start to do the analysis, we can start to drill into the detail, the proof of concept, but which delivery channel engages better in gamification versus the other. So here's my slide that I nearly decided to say, well, after this morning, if we're going to reinvent that whole idea. I'd like to think if we engage in a conversation, there'd be some logic behind. I'd like to get sort of what's wrong with points, badges, and leaderboards. So that's the definition. So I'm going to talk about the structural side. So for those that aren't sort of clear, there's broadly 2 types of gamification. There's the structural side, and then there's the content, where you take your content and you turn it into a game. I'm talking about the application of the game-based principle. So what we've done is we've broken the mechanics of why gaming works. So this isn't a digital exercise. This is a psychological exercise. So why were those young guys jumping on the train immediately talking, they were happy, they seemed to, they possibly even talking to each other, they were talking about what they were doing on their phones at that time. Nevertheless, there was this sort of, can we steal some of their time? So we wanted to look at changing learning behaviours. So this wasn't something that we went into lightly. You'll see from our little chapter story that we'd got a starting point, i.e. we got a problem that we had to fix. And we chose this amongst, we've got other activities that we go on to, but the main driver is how can we get students to study sort of more effectively? And we kind of like the points, badges and leaderboards. And the idea is that points, they describe them as dopamine bumps. So one of the reasons that people interact with their mobiles so frequently, and I don't think this is an age thing, this is a chemical thing. So, you flick through, how mindlessly sometimes are you just, and I watch my daughter's 24, and she just flicks through mindlessly. Now, there has to be a reason for her doing that, and there's a bit of FOMO maybe, that I want to check out, I might be missing something, so I like to keep a check of the world's activities. But nevertheless, there has to be some reward mechanism that sits behind it. That to us is the points. Okay, so the point system is a dopamine bump. The badges, and to a certain extent the leaderboards. So I've already alluded to the fact that a qualification is a badge, all right, and it means something. This is not trivial. The idea that you get some form of recognition is the thing when somebody introduces themselves and says, "What do you do?" And they say, "I'm an accountant." And they say, "Qualified?" And you say, "Yes. Would you like to see my badge?" Yeah? And it is that sort of status. The next question, and I'm sharing some real insights here into the world of finance, they'll then say, "First time pass?" Oh, yes, well, no, I did fail, and oh, right, I was a first time pass, actually. So therefore, you get this sort of thing. Badges and leaderboards create a social ranking. And many years ago, I had a conversation, and the story's now got a bit lost in time, but I'll tell it you anyway, because it's such a good story. We were walking, there was three of us walking down to a bar in Meribel in France, and the one guy, we were staying in the poor part of Meribel, and he was staying in what we refer to as the James Bond chalet. And this guy came up to him, and he said, "Hello, my name's Peter, I'm an airline pilot. What do you do?" Of which Scott said, is it your own plane, or are you just the driver?" And that element of sort of state, who comes up to you and says, "Hi, I'm an airline pilot." But that's why this matters. So the points, badges, and leaderboards does tie into something. It's into a status. People are competitive, good and bad, and they want to see themselves to a certain extent at the top. What we had to fix, because leaderboards are not new. Look, accountants love leaderboards. It's a process, but they can be destructive. So what we had to do was get beyond that. We want the badges, all right? I'll come back to the badges because there's a lot of interesting stuff in digital badging. And it could be that the whole of this professional education space in the next few years starts to take on the digital badge as they desperately try to give additional accreditation to this, hi, I'm an accountant, but I qualified 26 years ago, to, hi, I'm an accountant, look at my profile in the fact that I've got this digital badge. I put these were our early stabs at badges, and the reason that I put that there is because I wanted to share with you the humour that sits behind in the world of finance. So this one here, we had a badge for achieving, this is an accounting badge, and some of you will recognise there is Mr. T. So we had a whole afternoon where people spent time creating this, and so this is the badge Mr. T account, okay, and this was really funny for finance people. But this one over here is a cruel world, a cruel. See that? So that one was for these were accounting badges, and look, they went down a storm, absolute storm. And I share that because others don't seem to get that, and I'm just puzzled by it. Okay, so here's the problem that we faced. This was the problem. We'd got a group of students. It was for one client, a major client, and for some reason in a particular cohort, they didn't perform as well. We monitor data very closely. It's a pretty big thing. We've always monitored data. Accountants like data. They like spreadsheets. And so we got a problem with, we thought, lack of engagement, and we didn't think they were studying effectively. And coming back to all the concept of nudge and the idea of what can we be doing, a small change in the background that could get them to do it, we can educate them. We can say, guess what, guys? If you engage more, you're going to increase your pass rate. If you study using these techniques, it's much more effective. Or we can do something a little bit more behavioral in the background. So that's what we wanted to do. We want to improve their motivation. We want to encourage the students to study longer. So rather than just telling them how we did it, how could we do it? That was what we wanted. So that was the problem we started with. So this was chapter 1. So we sat down and we identified a pilot. Once again, you won't be surprised, we did it on a spreadsheet. So this was the proof of concept, and we built it. It was a brilliant spreadsheet, I have to say. We wanted to move away from the heroes and villains. All right, this guy's laughing here. You obviously don't appreciate a good spreadsheet from investment. The heroes and villains part, that if you're at the top of a league table, it's good. If you're at the bottom of the league table, it's depressing, and people sort of are deeply affected by this positioning. And we've always had that because we've had very demanding clients who've asked us, who are the people performing and who are the people not performing? So the reason for sharing the background on Kaplan, that's the world we come from. We wanted to reward the behaviours, not academic success. So historically, we'd effectively rewarded the academic success by saying, hey, guess what? You did really well in this test. You did really bad. You guys need to do better. You're a genius, you are. You don't need to do anything. Just keep up the good work. But that wasn't what we were trying to do. And all that does is reinforce people that are clever. Discuss. So what we wanted to do was to measure the progress and the performance. And this is where the points were quite interesting. So you see that 60-40 split there. We're rewarding points for progress. So we're rewarding points for attempting the test, not for getting it right. We do, but if you just look at that, you can see that there's sort of like 1 point for a good score, but 5 points. And look, we can alter this. So we worked on a 60-40 split. So we were basically saying that you can get to the top of the league table by demonstrating good learning behaviours, not by being good. And the plan is that we play with this. The problem with changing it is the comparability between one sitting and another gets difficult. So 1 point for 55%, 2 points. So look, nobody scores 100%. Nobody gets the 5 points. But just by completing a test before a deadline, which shows that they are planning and that their thought processes are organised, it's a good learning behaviour, you can get a lot more points, and therefore you can rise to the top of the leaderboard. So that was, that distinction between progress and performance was one of the critical things for us. Then we had to move it onto the LMS. So we worked with D2L, and Brightspace is our platform, but they didn't have a leaderboard. So they had a badging system. And we built, there's 2 leaderboards. This is the one that we built. And you can see, a bit disappointed. We've moved away from Mr. T account and the cruel world. And they're a bit more sort of, I suppose, normalized now. But the badges appear. So this is the student leaderboard, if you like. So this is the class one. So they can see how many points they can't see. So we're very careful that they can't see the other students, but they know their own position. And equally, you can see how these badges stack up. So as they go through, the more tests they attempt, the better learning behaviours. The 60-40 split is trying to encourage them to do good things, which we hope will then lead to better academic outcomes. And that's the other thing to bear in mind about us. We have a very measurable outcome. All right, and that's why I think, we're a curiosity. You know, everybody is an accountant who's in education. So we carry none of the expertise on one level or the baggage on another of a teaching background. So, and we're small. We might train 45,000 accountants, but we're small enough and we're manageable enough to look at and explore what we do. So we can control a lot more. We have standard programs, they roll out a lot more easily. The second one is effectively compares a regional cohort, so the Leeds office versus the Manchester office, so we get that sort of a setup. And then, as I said, they get various badges for different things along the way. So if they become top of a class, they get a gold badge, etc. And this is where, in the future, things might get really interesting, because, of course, what we're doing is keeping a digital record, not of their academic success, but effectively of their learning process. Bringing faculty with us was essential. It's been difficult. We created infographics. We wanted the classroom part of the product. So the presenters, they engage, the tutors, our faculty team engage and present the league tables to encourage those good learning behaviours. So we needed to bring them. We asked them to look at, to bring up the badges in a classroom environment, knowing again that it's not the heroes and villains. It's say, look guys, the reason this team's doing better than this one is because they're doing the tests. And even if you get a fake behaviour, I'm only doing the tests to get the badge, that doesn't matter, which is kind of like an interesting concept. This was a comment from, we asked some of the tutors, what did they think of it? Massive help in engaging students at the start. I still struggle with this, one student who did a little dance. Accountants don't normally do that sort of a thing. It's completely out of character. So if you'd achieved that, it was pretty impressive. So here are the results. This is the results of the first time. Now, we've rolled this out at scale, but this is the results that we've got. As you can see, the quartiling, which we've traditionally always done, out of 79 students, 19 students, they all got an average mark of 79. They all passed. We get very high pass rates, but their gamification score, this is what gave us the confidence that it was working, that pretty much the gamification scores correlate with the actual academic performance. There are outliers. There are people that are performing with low gamification points, and they're doing well. These guys will pass the exam almost regardless of the effect. But what this said to us was that this is having an impact. We also run a retrospective analysis. We went back to the previous cohort that didn't get involved with gamification at all and effectively added the points to their behaviours, and it had nothing like the impact that it had here. So we had 3 ways of attempting to measure. Now, I know that correlation and causation are different, and all we're doing here is we're looking at correlation. But causation in education and learning is incredibly difficult to prove. This is what we're doing now. So this is the Atscale bit. We've introduced some new badges, a determined badge, a driven badge, and a planning badge. These carry, so you can see here, attempt all the knowledge checks. So these are the checks, the little tests they have to do along the way. Booking the exam. So we're now playing with other behaviours behind the scenes. One of the problems we're finding is students, exams are now on demand. Students who don't book the exam do worse than students that do. So we are introducing, once again, this sort of idea of the dopamine bump to get the badges, to boost them up the league table, but genuinely trying to help them do the things that we think are going to work and are going to be good for them. I desperately wanted to get some results for you for this, but we started the Atscale part back in August, and we're just pulling the results in now. So I hadn't got the live results from this latest round, is when we've opened the games up from not just one cohort, but across the platform. And I'm really interested to see what happens when they move up to this next level. So what happens after that? And this is the interesting byproduct that I'll leave you with and pass over to Caroline, is that what we're finding in education, particularly in this exam world, with students coming out of schools and universities, they are looking very similar. There seems no sort of question around the level of grade inflation, and it's certainly getting difficult for employers to be able to distinguish between one or the other. But here's the thought. This is the thing that I sort of think is really quite interesting. If you had two candidates with the same academic test results, but you could look at the way that they got there, and the one struggled, which historically would have been seen as a weakness, and had to redo the test. But you know what? They redid it. And the next time they did it, they did better. Wouldn't you want the student who actually found it difficult, but actually showed some of Angela Duckworth's grit? Because when you launch them into the real world, sometimes this academic success doesn't translate. And do they just give up at their first failure? So we got sort of really quite, coming back to the last session I attended, really curious around the idea of, does this give you something else? Is there something that we could see where we could actually start saying, these candidates aren't, this guy failed, but look, they picked themselves up, they had a go again, and we can see this in their track record. And the last point I'll leave you with, which is this idea that by rewarding behaviors, so big fan of Carol Dweck and the whole growth mindset argument, by rewarding behaviors other than exam results, but good learning behaviors that then are proven to demonstrate some degree of success, do we create a motivational framework? And the little footnote there about the brain can do the rest is around the brain plasticity and the way that the brain can rewire, being additionally more motivated by a reward system that actually treats them as human beings and not necessarily as accountants. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we've got something completely different. Scott and myself are here today from the Royal Bank of Scotland. So I suspect that most of you know who the Royal Bank of Scotland are, so I won't give you any stats and figures around about that, but we're from the Learning and Development Design team. So, and really we're here today to share our story, which is quite different from the one that we've just heard from Stuart. So I head up the team, the design team at RBS for learning and development, and we have 17 designers. Scott is one of our key designers, and we design learning solutions for the whole bank. So things like e-learning, modules, assessments, face-to-face workshops, podcast videos, and of course a blend of all of those different things. And as I said, we're here really to share our story of how last year we designed and launched a series of games for the first time. So we're here to share the approach that we took, how they landed, the results that we saw, and also to share some of our learnings from that. So where to start with our story? We'd been looking at gamification for a while, so a lot of the designers just had a keen interest in it to research the subject, upskill themselves, and really were keen to learn more and to start experimenting. So we'd been keeping an eye out for a good use case for some time. And then, as luck would have it, around July of last year, our colleagues in the strategy capability team came to us with an ask, with an idea. Could we create a game as part of their campaign to roll out the bank-wide new people capabilities? So these 5 new critical people capabilities, which never quite rolls off the tongue, we call them CPCs, we like an acronym in the bank. So these new people capabilities would replace the old standards. So it was a really big change for the organisation. These CPCs, it was really important that colleagues started to understand what it meant for them, because we'd weave them through all of our people processes, from recruitment to talent and succession, performance management, and learning and development. So we had 5 of them, and they were made up of a broad range of knowledge, skills, and behaviours. So the 5 of them are improver innovator, change ready, critical thinker, connected, and trusted advisor. So what was our brief? To be honest, it was quite tough when we look back on it. The ask from the team was that we create 5 games, no longer than 5 minutes each, and 1 game for each of those 5 critical people capabilities. So let's take a look at what each of those capabilities mean. So the first one, improver innovator. So our improver innovator capability is really around about generating and progressing new ideas, as you'd expect. So having a digital mindset and really making the most of technology. Being change ready means that you actively participate in change, you're comfortable with that ambiguity, and you're resilient and self-aware. Our critical thinkers understand the big picture, so they will use information, data, and insight to solve problems and make decisions. Connected means collaborating across boundaries and businesses, so sharing knowledge, supporting others, and valuing differences. And finally, our trusted advisors is all about being credible, knowledgeable, high ethical standards underpinned by warmth, empathy, and emotional intelligence. The ask from the team was that it should be engaging and light-hearted in terms of the style, and in terms of the outcomes, we wanted, by the time somebody had played the game, that they should understand what each of those capabilities covered. The games needed to be able to support a much wider comms campaign, so it wasn't just the games that we were relying on, it was part of a much bigger comms campaign, which really encouraged peer-to-peer and social learning and that sharing of these games. So I'm going to hand over to Scott, who, as I say, designed some of these games, and Scott's going to take us through how the team approached the design process and also explain a bit about the games themselves. There you go.
Is that coming through okay? So yeah, when the CPC request first came in, the team got together as an idea generation exercise. So what we did is we split into teams and we brainstormed ideas for what these modules or games could be. And as you can see, the brief asked for it to be engaging and lighthearted. So you'll instantly move towards a more gamified rather than a traditional method. And this right away was quite a big change from how we normally did things. It was a big investment for our team. The entire team took the day out and we organized ourselves into teams. We brainstormed kind of a number of ideas, and a lot of these were ideas, as you've heard, were things that we'd kind of been stirring up in the background, things that we'd always wanted to try but never really had a good case for. So a lot of us, myself included, were quite excited for the chance to kind of stretch our legs a bit. Eventually, after we'd all kind of collate the ideas, we fed them back to the stakeholder and got feedback on what worked and what didn't. And then we refined these ideas into what would then become the CPC games. So that's a couple of examples of what we end up coming up with on the day. One is just you go through a little town, you do little tasks on the way. The other one is a kind of trusty trumps, top trumps style game where you kind of have to compare cards, and everyone knows that game. But yeah, with each game we ended up working very closely with the stakeholders, the subject matter experts, or the SMEs as we call them. We did weekly checkups. We went back and forth with sharing ideas and updates. It was a very collaborative experience. It wasn't us saying what it should be or them saying what they want. It was very much a weekly conversation that we kind of kept going all the way through production. And we wanted this to make sure not only kind of that everyone was happy with the result, but also that the games taught and promoted the behaviors of each corresponding CPC. So I'll go into a bit of detail on each one. The first one, Trusted Advisor. Trusted Advisor, as you've heard, needs to be credible, knowledgeable, have high ethical standards, builds trust relationships, underpinned with warmth, empathy, emotional intelligence. And we came up with Trusty Trumps. It's obviously the trading card game, but you use it to build up a robot as you go, and that robot's going to have all these examples and characteristics that you want out of a trusted advisor. Change ready, where you have to be comfortable with ambiguity, resilience, be self-aware, be adaptable, curious, and open to learning. We came up with Bobby's Burgers, where you run a burger van, and there's changing weather, there's changing kind of competition, there's kind of on the news, there might be like an outbreak of food poisoning on the news, which is going to affect your sales, and you get these, and they're randomized each time, and you have to do that to work out how you're going to run your business, and at the end, try and make as much profit as possible. Connected, where you collaborate across boundaries, have one bank thinking, kind of have team working, share knowledge, and value differences and inclusivity. We came up with Connected, very complicated name, where it's inspired by kind of a Wreck-It Ralph type theme, where you are this person, you go through and you break down the borders, break down the boundaries between you, and kind of assemble a team based on their characteristics and their personality types. And then Improver Innovator, where you generate ideas, progress new ideas and ways of thinking, have a digital mindset, and make the most of technology. Eventually turned into Revolution Rally, which is a game where you have to kind of assemble a car to win a race. And to do that, you have to go around this little town and do kind of quests for people, talk to people, and improve their lives by kind of modernizing their businesses, kind of helping them out. And doing so, you get parts for your car, and that's how you eventually might win the race. Now, the technology used for this, I will trust me, I do know that's only 4. I'll come back to that in a sec. But the technology used was Adobe and Articulate for the most part, with a small amount of Vyond for the Bobby's Burger game. And this was technology that we'd used for years and grown very comfortable and accustomed with. And they weren't really designed to build games, but as you can see, the possibility is there. And the reason I bring that up is it's to show that you don't need a kind of a game engine or knowledge of game design to make these things like this. None of us did. All you need to really do is think about what makes games engaging, what makes people want to play them, kind of from a psychological standpoint, and how can you bring that into what you're already doing. Carl Kapp, who's quite a leading kind of person in this field, had a quote that always stuck with me, which is, gamification is not and should not be about fun, it should be about engagement. And as a team, no matter the project, we always do the same thing at the beginning of every project. We sit down with a content stakeholder or the SME or just whoever's kind of in charge, and we say, what's the objective of your learning? What's the behavior change you want or the knowledge gap you want filled? And this is always the first thing we consider, and that carries on through when we start thinking about gamification, because gamification, yes, it can be used to engage and motivate people, and that's kind of, if you think, kind of, if you really want to be in depth with it, that's kind of the start. That's only the ground level where it could go. When learning is tied directly to that business learning need, when you've kind of drilled down to the very nugget of what they want, and then you build an entire game around that, you have your success criteria, what is going to be the mark of success for your learning module. And when you start thinking about it from a point of gamification, you realize that success in your game means that you can prove that you understand or have competency in the subject matter. But if you want to go further than that even, in the best case scenario, the game itself will reinforce these themes, these messages of your subject. And this can be done in world, or it can be done kind of subtly, or even more direct. Obviously, this isn't the case for every gamification module, but it's definitely something to think about as you're going through. So, I worked on 2 of the games. I worked on Revolution Rally and Lost in Space. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to talk about Lost in Space in a bit more detail, and just kind of elaborate on some of these concepts I've been talking about, and just, show the thought process that went on as I was kind of building the game. The concept for critical thinking came from a different place than everything else. It came from a real NASA training exercise where kind of trainees were asked to rank the 15 items in this kind of made-up scenario in order of importance. The scenario in question is you're on a shuttle on the way to your moon base, the shuttle crash lands off course, and what you have to do is you have to get across the surface of the moon to safety. And basically that's the whole scenario, and then it asks you, these are 15 items, rank them in order of what's more important. And I immediately loved the scenario. I thought it basically had all the things that kind of games use to motivate people straight away. It had setup, it has kind of already this scenario that's very kind of, I wouldn't say relatable, none, as far as I can tell, none of us have been to space, but it's a dangerous situation. It's the most basic dangerous situation. It's survival. You have a human response to that. You want to reach the end. You want to reach safety. And it has challenge. It has stakes. It has, a very inhospitable environment, and the challenge itself is literally to get from one place to another. And that's the goal. That's the reward. That's the final thing. That's kind of the way you can reward learners and give them feedback. It's quite straightforward. Did you make it to the base or did you not? There's not really much of an in-between. And I realized quite quickly that only very small amount of tweaking, you can add a lot more to that. You can, for example, if you gave them a crew, you're the captain of a crew, you have empathy, you have investment, you're responsible for these other human beings. And the last thing I thought it still needed was, just from an interaction and an input standpoint, I didn't really like the idea of racking these 15 items. I didn't think it really was very interesting. So I thought of these old school kind of adventure games I used to play as a kid on the PC, where you have an inventory and you go around and you get a key to unlock a gate or like lower a bridge or something, and this kind of got you through obstacles, and this was where the game took shape. I changed it so that instead of ranking the games in order of importance, you choose 6 to take with you and you leave the rest behind. And then as you go through this journey, which is what ended up coming, it became, the entire game was this journey that you eventually went on. You're confronted with different scenarios. In this one, you and your crew get lost and you'll start arguing amongst yourselves. And basically are the items that you took with you, can they get you through this instance? And There are about, I want to say, 7 different scenarios, and they're randomized to a degree each time. There are 2 paths you can take, and there is some random chance in what the scenarios are thrown at you. So the games aren't the same every time, so there is a bit of kind of interest in that, but also you don't want it to feel unfair. You want people to be able to plan around what might come up. And if at any point the users didn't have the right items, or if the items ran out, then game over, they've lost. You might be asking, what does this have to do with critical thinking? So a critical thinker gathers information and data, pays attention to detail, constructively challenges the decisions of others, makes sound decisions, solves problems, and thinks strategically to keep focused on your goal while evaluating your risk appetite. And as you can see there, we kind of tied that back into the aspects all throughout the module. And I can't take full credit for this. The stakeholders were very good at keeping me on level of how does this relate back to critical thinking? How can this kind of reinforce the message? So something like pay attention to the detail. You have an oxygen and water meter and a food meter that all decrease as you go, and if at any point they hit 0, game over. And it's quite easy to get caught up in the challenge of it all and miss that out, and kind of that's your game over. So the one last thing about the game is a big part of it was the fact that it wasn't designed to be completed on the first attempt. While it's possible to reach the moon base on your first try, the game is designed around the fact that you probably won't. There is an amount of trial and error involved. You want to see what works and what doesn't, and that's very much kind of a gamification feature. You don't want people to beat a game first try. If you beat a game first try, you'd want your money back. What you want is for people to basically find out what doesn't work and gain competency as they go. And what we wanted to make sure when we did this was to make sure people weren't frustrated. We wanted people to want to come back. And so what we did, a number of things, like the randomization of the paths so people get a different experience, but also we didn't want people to feel frustrated. There is a skip code where you can skip back to a point so you don't have to go through the intro again. And also, most importantly, you have feedback. You have, depending on how you've failed your mission, you get individualized feedback on what went wrong and what you might be able to do differently the next time. And that's quite important. If at some point a gamer loses their game and they aren't really told why, or they aren't explained why it's fairly done, they'll feel cheated and they'll stop playing. And in the end, this ended up being a great way to measure whether or not the game was working as we intended, because we were able to track whether people came back after each failing. And what we saw is that a vast majority of people did, which turned out to be kind of one of our big successes, which Caroline will be able to talk about.
So yes, we're going to look at the results. So we've considered it through a few different lenses. So we're going to look at from our learners, what was the feedback from them? From externally in the industry, how did that look like? And finally, internally, what was the impact for us? So I guess for context, the games that Scott's talked about here, none of them were mandated because we actually wanted people to feel like they were learning for fun by choice or had been encouraged by peers to kind of join in. So that's a wee bit of context in terms of which is quite, so in the bank we do have a lot of mandatory learning, but this wasn't something that was pushed to people. So if we stick with Lost in Space, the game that Scott was telling us in detail, in terms of the stats, scores and the doors, within the first 6 weeks, Lost in Space was played nearly 900 times. At the end of the game, we asked people to rate it. So 78% of users who rated the game out of 10 rated it 7 or higher. And interestingly, as Scott has said, is that we had many people who returned multiple times or played the game multiple times to try and win. And that was 67% of our users came back more than once. And one of our external partners has told us that that is high, with a good benchmarking, usually between 30 and 40%. So that was a great success for us. Externally within the industry, a few things have happened as a result of the work that we did last year. So first of all, the team were shortlisted. So Scott and the guys were shortlisted for a Learning Technology Awards 2019. I guess one of the things that I was really dead proud of, was that it was the only team who had created the games internally. No external support, something that guys did themselves. We've been asked to talk, so the case study's been showcased at a few events, so the guys have been speaking at DemoFest and obviously been asked to come and talk here today as well to share our experiences. Something we did at the end of last year, and I think Sponge are here in the room, I'm pretty sure I saw one of the Sponge guys. So at the end of last year, we asked Sponge to carry out a review of the game. So as Scott said at the beginning, this was something that we just went for. We used the tools that we had, and we had a bash. So we wanted to see how that kind of stacked up with how the experts were doing this. And I guess that gave us a few things you guys looked at from learning objectives perspective, playability, user experience, how was that stacking up? And really what that gave us was some great insight. So it gave us insight into how it stacked up, but also some learnings for how we would improve on next time. So some really useful insight into that. Internally, there's probably been 3 things that have happened as a result of this. So I guess from coming back to our learning outcomes at the top of the session, learner feedback told us that the core concepts of those critical people capabilities, our CPCs, were successfully transferred. So at the end of the game, they understood what those capabilities were made up of. And that's despite, as you've seen, the game not being directly linked to the workplace or anything to do with financial services industry, clearly. So the second thing was around about the campaign element. So we really encourage, so we use Workplace in RBS. So what we saw is that we saw colleagues kind of showing off about the results. They were using hashtags, I saved the crew, and we saw people pushing those hashtags and sharing their results and really encouraging people to get involved. So that was a really important lesson for us about how we drive people in terms of a campaigning aspect. And finally, culturally, I think there's a belief that learning in a regulated environment like ours must be serious to be effective. Because of these games, what it showed us is learners can make that leap. And I think what we're seeing is that some of our policy owners are much more open to using elements of gamification into our regulatory e-learning to bring scenarios to life. And as we wrap up, so as we finish off, I'm going to leave you with a quick sneaky peek of Scott's latest e-learning module, just to that point. So this is Hotel du Risque. So it's built for our risk team, set, funnily enough, in a hotel. But it combines the serious message of whistleblowing with elements of gaming in a fun style. So just a good example of how the work that we did last year has started to open doors into this space as well. So I hope you've enjoyed hearing our story. It's been helpful and there's some takeaways that you guys can bring into your own business. And Julie, I'm going to hand back to you. Thank you.
All right. So, warmth and empathy in the banking sector, dancing accountants, and one of my takeaways is, does gamification always require puns? Is that like a thing? Right, okay. So, questions from you all. What questions do you have for the panel? I think we've got a roving mic at the back there. Okay, thank you.
How long did this take?
Which ones?
Either one. Any of them.
Okay, that's a good question. Do you know off the top of your head? Do you want to go, Stuart, first?
Yeah, so we started it back, it's taken us about 3 years. So we're in the 3rd year. We have a long lead time because when the students start the exam to get the results, we're always looking at 6 months. So it's not that the gamification itself takes that long. It's just our means of assessing whether it's worked, has to work within the period of the program. So yeah, so the rollout. So we started in August. We put it on one single level. We won't know the results till next month. It will, to do it again to see what they do when they lift up to them. That will be another. So it's a long duration, but it's not such a long process. We were stumbling along. I think the bit from building the spreadsheet to knowing what it was when we automated it, we know what we're trying to do now. We know how the badges work. We know the mix of the skills and that sort of thing. So that bit is certainly a lot quicker.
Yeah, I've been asked this question quite a few times, and I really wish I had a better answer. The problem is that it was built roughly from start to finish over about 2 months, but I had multiple projects running at the same time, so the time was split between them all. Towards the end, I did just kind of push everything aside and make sure that these were done well. So the answer I give is 2 months, but it's
and
very
that was
much
for
a
2
ballpark.
games, yeah.
Yeah, that was for 1 game.
Hi there. Thank you so much. Great presentation. I'm a totally believer on gamification. However, I've been facing more and more people to be skeptical of using gamified techniques into learning. I wanted to ask you if you are facing the same and why you think this is happening. And the second question is, how can we get their buy-in again?
Yeah, it's funny, we were talking about this the other day. So I think, we saw some stats there, but the verbatim feedback, like honestly, was really, really mixed. So some people that really enjoyed it want more of that stuff, but actually there's some people that are like, nah, it's not for me. Don't get it. I think you're dumbing it down, and actually it's not for me. So we definitely see that, and actually we've got some of that stuff going on just now. So I think it is a bit Marmite, if that's it. You know, people love it or hate it probably. I think what we've done is try to make sure that the use case is right. So what we're not talking about is like splashing it over everything and saying, right, everything must have that element, because I think that can be quite dangerous. So for me, I think it's about making sure that you've got clear purpose and a really good use case, because then it can shine and you can see the positives rather than going wild with it, would be my take on it. I don't know if you've got anything
No, a big
else.
thing about that as well is just kind of setting expectations for the learner. Recently we had someone very unhappy that their serious risk module was kind of based around a hotel. And what we learned from that is that they were expecting a very serious risk module. And so we had to go away and say, there are plenty serious risk modules here, they all are. This was one lighthearted, optional one. Obviously a big part of it, I'd say as well, is just don't make it mandatory. If you're gonna keep it lighthearted, make sure people can choose it.
Yeah, and that's why I think I always use us as the accountants aren't normally that forgiving. And the other thing, because of the environment in which we're doing this, you know, people fail exams and they lose jobs. So any distraction from what they perceive as being a valuable contribution to the learning it is a distraction. And we have had, that's why the bit about, I think where the tutors support the process and use it within the context of, you know, this is, and I'll use the word fun, you know, but I really like that sort of, it's not about fun, it's about engagement. So this is just for fun, but there is a serious point behind it, and we can explain that to you if you would like. But look, these are the scores on the doors, and we're almost appealing to those base instincts that sort of do it. And then we get on. So we're spending, I suppose, not even 5%, 2% of the time with the game inside the learning environment, and you know, 98% of the time we're then delivering what they value most of all. I think if we were to try and to turn it, and that's why we were having a long chat earlier today, for us to create a game that would be effective within the environment where you've got a high stakes examination at the end, I'm not sure that would work for us. I'd like to think it would, but I'm not sure it would. Whereas this appeals to the scoring mentality, and I'm not just saying if I'm saying, you know, who hasn't got a steps program, you know, how many steps, 10,000 steps today? That's not a game, that's a fundamental tool that's psychologically working in the background that says, hey, I better go and do another 5 steps, because if I do that, I'll hit my 10,000 steps and I'll be in this position. So the psychology behind it, I think, is a key part, but where the tutors don't really engage, we don't see such a good response part. So that's that human aspect that supports it. And that's why we have to bring them. And they don't all, I'm sure some tell us that it's going well, but they don't, in their heart, they just think, no, it's just a game.
This is really for RBS. Can you tell me, you said there was a high participation rate and a return rate as well. So were your staff allowed to play during working hours?
Yeah,
At any time, there was no set sessions, they could just do as they felt?
So the quick answer to that is there was no restrictions. I think the way that our business is set up means that sometimes, so we'll have to work around the businesses. So for example, if you're in a branch, you can't be playing when you should be serving customers. But that's the true of any learning. So the businesses will sometimes mandate some learning time if they are front facing. But actually, so me sitting in Gogarburn in the Edinburgh headquarters, absolutely, I could go on, register for it and just go do.
Okay, any other questions?
Thank you for sharing your experiences. I was really struck by gamification. It's not about fun, but it's about engagement. Now, the engagement you can measure by the number of people coming back to play again. But you showed us the figure that they scored 7 out of 10 with your participants, isn't it? And then what did you measure there? What did you ask them for their evaluating the game? Was it fun or was it something else?
So I think it was twofold. So I think what we did was at the end of it, we asked them for a score. So that metric, so 7, so that 70% scored at 7 or higher. So there's that bit. But then there was verbatim feedback as well. So tell us what you got from it. What did you learn at the end of it? So it was kind of twofold. Give us a number, but also give us information about what you learned. So from that, that's where we were able to see that actually it had been transferred, that people understood what that capability, or starting to understand what that capability was. So it was twofold, numbers, but also exactly what did you get out of it as well. Yeah.
Okay, one over there, and then last question at the front down here, if that's okay.
Thank you. I got a question. We just saw one screen with theory about the standard. In fact, that you wanted to talk who was in the game. Is it just that screen of theory that was in the game, or was there other theory explained somewhere through the game?
So was that just was the space theme throughout?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It was the exact same scenario. It was you're on a moon, basically shuttle, try to get to moon, you crash, and you have to get to, and that carries all the way throughout. Even the end, the results, the last pages, you and your crew are now fully recovered and ready to go on your next mission, that kind of thing.
Yeah, but I mean, at the end you saw there was a screen by explaining all the different parts. In fact, from that specific, I don't know, the standard or the critical one. I don't know. I don't recall the name of what they need to learn. But is it just at the end that you get a resume, in fact, of what it was all about, or was it somewhere explained during the game?
No, well, that was like the one bit of the module we kind of leaned on the fourth wall a bit and said, this is what the module is all about. The rest of it was smaller learnings in terms of those behaviors that we're trying to get. We kind of felt that was more kind of an incremental thing, bit by bit. We didn't really sit them down and explain that's what we were trying to get them to do.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm actually wondering, how did you create these scenes that can be seen on the screen?
This one.
Yeah.
So the images themselves are sourced from Shutterstock, but they're quite heavily edited in Illustrator. And we do a lot in-house as well. So yeah, it's all one person per project for the most part. So this was kind of weeks of work trying to make the exact right images and then use them across the module.
Okay, so I am conscious of everybody's time. If anyone has, I know I said last question, if there is any burning questions, because we are going to be early, which is for some good, for some not good. But if you've got anything you've not asked yet, there is one question there, and then that will be us. We will be done.
Hi, I have a question around during development. Did you do any kind of like play testing, sort of iterate on the designs with just blind people, like blind play testers, to kind of refine the design in that way?
Yeah, absolutely. We realized quite quickly on that when I went back to the stakeholders, they weren't having the same experience that I thought they would, and we eventually, this was for the Lost in Space one, which was the first one I worked on. We realized quite quickly that the more we open up, the better. So we had kind of people within our department, in the learning and development department, and also wider, but we definitely put it out and had people feedback. I think all in all, I got maybe 30, 40 people, different people doing feedback, and we'd always bring it back and say, it's now updated. Basically, see what you think now. And I don't think there was a single person that didn't get something useful from.
All right. So without further ado, I'd just like to thank our speakers this afternoon for making it really interesting and kind of keeping us all going. So Stuart Pedley-Smith on the end there from Kaplan, Caroline Black and Scott Anderson from RBS. And if you'd just like to put your hands together for our speakers. Thank you.